Welcome to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. And now your host, Tim Johnson.
Committee of 100 President and CEO Michael Olivier joins us when we return on this edition of the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
Passion, experience, safety. These are what set Arkell Constructors apart as a premier general contractor. At Arkell Constructors, our goal is to exceed our clients' expectations, whether it's commercial, industrial, or facility maintenance. We have the team and processes in place to provide a solution for you. To us, every project is a resume for our future. Arkell Constructors, the solution for your next building project.
Consumers and property owners with construction projects can have a successful result or regretful experiences that could have been avoided. Before any construction project, verify licensure of the contractor and check references. Scammers will claim to be insured or bonded, so always check first. Download our app, LA Contractor, from the Android or Apple Store. Visit our website, lacontractor.org, or contact the Louisiana State Licensing Board for Contractors. We're here to help before things go wrong. Hire a licensed contractor. It's the law.
Since 1919, we've designed and constructed hundreds of industrial plants, roads, ships, dams, and executed some of the most complex jobs in the world. In fact, our quality and dependability are legendary. Today, the legend continues as Brown & Root delivers engineering, construction, maintenance, and industrial specialty services throughout the U.S. and the world from our headquarters here in Louisiana. We are Brown & Root.
Promoting workplace safety and family wellness. That's our motto at Gulf Coast Occupational Medicine. The Gulf Coast staff is made up of some of the most knowledgeable and hardest working medical professionals in Louisiana. We care about your safety and your bottom line. With 8 convenient locations in the greater Baton Rouge area, our services include injury management, physical exams, medical surveillance, and substance abuse testing. For more information, visit us on the web at gcombr.info and ride the wave to safety.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Michael Olivier, President and CEO of the Committee of 100, is our guest. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. Louisiana native, interesting work background, part of Governor Blanco's cabinet, a decorated economic developer. Tell us a little bit more about your background, your history, and where you're from.
Well, I was born in St. Mary Parish. Some people know that because Franklin, Louisiana is the home place for Mike Foster.
Right.
My dad worked for Mike Foster. In fact, Mike Foster's, during his administration, he asked me to come from Mississippi to take a job as Secretary of Economic Development until I asked him what was the pay. And when I found that pay was going to be less than what I was being paid in Mississippi, I said, thanks, but no thanks, I can't afford the pay cut. Governor Blanco changed that. She asked me to come to work for her. Our relationship goes back to the fact that I graduated from the University of Louisiana Lafayette with a master's degree, worked at the university, then went to work at the Chamber of Commerce. That's where Dan Juneau and I worked together. And from that, the Lafayette Economic Development Authority was housed in the chamber. At the time, it was called the Lafayette Harbor Terminal and Industrial Development District. Now, how would you like to answer that?
Put that on your business card.
Yeah, so we had to come to the legislature and change that name, so we had it changed to the Lafayette Economic Development Authority. From there, I was recruited to go to work in Mississippi. Lo and behold, I was working for an organization that years before, in 1968, the Lafayette Chamber of Commerce had visited and copied the model used by Harrison County, Mississippi, which they came back with the almost exact language in their bill to create the Lafayette Harbor Terminal Industrial Development Commission, which eventually became the Lafayette Economic Development Authority, with a dedicated tax, property tax, for the development of the industrial parks and other necessary infrastructure to grow and attract industry. And so I worked in Louisiana and then moved to Mississippi, working in Mississippi for some 15 years before I was recruited to come back here. When I came back here, by the way, it wasn't a process where she called me up and says, come to work. It was a process that I had to compete for the job. That was Kathleen Blanco. She didn't want to just give you anything. So, with my credentials, fortunately, I had been educated in the principles of economic development and had achieved some status as a certified economic developer and as a fellow member of at the time, the American Economic Development Council, which today is called the International Economic Development Council. I interviewed and got the job. After serving 4 years, I went to work for a company out of Lebanon. That would be Lebanon across the...
Not Pennsylvania.
Not Pennsylvania. And they had their headquarters in Dubai, and I worked out of Houston, Texas, shuttling back and forth for about almost 2 years, and then I was called by this group called the Committee of 100 for Economic Development Incorporated, and they said, we'd like to have an economic developer run our organization because we want to live up to our name as an economic development agent of change and support for whoever is the governor and whoever is the Secretary of Economic Development. Well, I know a little bit about that, so I came back in 2009 and have been here since.
We're going to learn more about the Committee of 100 for Economic Development as we go along, but I want to ask you this question. You know, that background, that history as a professional economic developer, certified economic developer, a lot of experience there. As you look at our state today, Michael, from an economic development standpoint, what's Louisiana doing right, and where do we have the most room for improvement?
You know, I tell people all the time, I think one of the best experiences anybody in any profession can have is going out of state and working in another state, especially a neighboring competing state. And that gave me a great perspective on Louisiana and what was right and wrong about Louisiana. Louisiana is blessed with assets that go beyond what many states have. The Mississippi River, the ports, the natural gas nexus, obviously, the oil and gas industry, the service industry, all of the things. But we are a service-oriented economy, which has a volatility to it, and we have to be very cautious of that. Certainly agriculture is a part of it, but for Louisiana, I have to say that this industrial boom that we've experienced has been phenomenal. And we need to credit it to the very fact of the logistics and the raw materials. Mm-hmm. You know, economic development is based on the very simple principles: access to raw materials and access to market. And here again, it proves we're the nexus of natural gas. That's why so much of what we have today, these mega projects that have been announced and some of which are in process, and I'm talking about over $100 billion of projects have been announced over the last decade. When I was secretary, I was fortunate enough to get to work on the very first, called Cheniere. And I was just amazed that at that point, when we were working on it, it was an import project. Right. And you had to get permission from the FERC and other federal regulatory agencies to get this on board. Former Senator Bennett Johnston was one of the people who helped with that. Working with Governor Blanco, Bennett Johnston, and others, the regulatory side was finally passed. It didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. And then the switch going from importing to exporting, what a difference, you know. So the changes for Louisiana and other states that produce natural gas, the fracking technology, all of these things have resulted in a huge difference for Louisiana. Now, what we do with it remains to be seen. And I want to say that with over $100 billion of projects, normally when any state has $5 billion in 1 year, that's a big deal. Right. But to have $100 billion over a short period of time of 8-10 years, that's an amazing thing, consistently and constantly. Now, our job is to keep up with it in terms of providing them the labor force that they need. And so the good things that we have in this state are great. What we don't have in this state is we don't have a very cohesive tax code that allows businesses an opportunity to simply understand what is their tax cost. Uncertainty is a big deal. Many companies look at us at first. They see that we have a high corporate income tax. They see that we have high taxes across the board in comparison to other states. When we get into the room with them finally and we convince them that there are ways around this that we've cobbled together over the many years, incentives and exclusions and exemptions, then it changes. And we can demonstrate to them that we're very competitive. But what if we don't get into that room? What if we don't show them all of what has to be done? So why can't we simplify this thing, bring it down to some reality to make it easy for them to understand?
I want to get into some of that too, and some of the recommendations that your group has been participating in and helped to provide. I also want to talk about the Committee of 100 and its specific role. We'll take a break. We're visiting with Michael Olivier. He is the President and CEO of the Committee of 100, and you're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
Spadel's Florist was founded over 30 years ago. From my mom's kitchen, we have grown into one of the largest florists in this area. There's a sense in our community that you stick together. Good times or bad, and oil and gas is part of that family. They're my neighbors, they're my customers, they're the person I'm sitting next to at church. If oil and gas is doing well, all of our businesses are doing well. We are Louisiana Oil and Gas.
What if I said that whatever good things you build you? And that in this economy, sweat never loses its value? What if I said that there isn't a challenge in the world too great for a craft professional with the right tools? And that the steps that lead from where you are to where you want to be can only be built by you? Build your future at byf.org.
It might be one of the most efficient, most effective methods of communications we've ever used.
For more than 20 years, the TJC Group has been helping companies assess their training needs and to develop programs that improve the effectiveness and productivity of their teams.
Training doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. Let us put our experience and expertise to work for you.
The TJC Group, facilitating solutions for business and industry.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Michael Olivier, President and CEO, Committee of 100 is our guest. Give us an overview of that organization. Business Roundtable, a lot of high-profile businesses and CEOs that are part of that organization. Tell us about your mission.
In 1992, this organization was formed, so we're celebrating our 25th year in operation. It was formed out of a need for the business community to have some influence on public policy that affected business and industry that wasn't going to be diluted. In other words, it was going to be very specific. You know, I tell people when they ask me, what's the difference between our state chamber of commerce and your organization? Well, it's really embodied in the fact that we have a U.S. Chamber of Commerce who has thousands of members based in Washington, D.C., and you can go online, pay your fees, and join. And then you have the National Business Roundtable, which is by invitation encouraged to bring in some of the senior leadership, CEOs of companies that make a difference in the United States. And they number in the hundreds. So there's a difference right there. And so their lane is very narrow. They focus on business issues that impact business and industry. Now, do they agree with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on issues? In many instances, you're going to find they do. It's just that they don't get into as many issues as the U.S. Chamber. For instance, they don't get into social issues. But what they do focus on are issues that impact business and industry, such as labor, such as education, for sure. And that's what we do as well. You'll see our lane is pretty well narrowed in terms of workforce, and under workforce is labor and education, for sure. And certainly in terms of what we're doing in terms of the tax programs that we have, changing the tax code in Louisiana, and that's the way we started. Back in the 1990s, after this group was formed, it was formed for the very purpose of changing state government and impacting state government with a private sector influence. So the Committee of 100 members paid for one of the big five accounting firms to help determine what were the best ways that Louisiana could change, and modeled it after what was going on in other states. And the SECURE program came out of that, which for 3 years was a long-term study that then implemented, of the 180 plus recommendations, about 150 of those recommendations were actually passed by the Louisiana legislature. And so during the Foster and Romer administrations, a lot of this was done. And so fast forward to the 2000s, and in 2014, we were approached by the Public Affairs Research Council, Robert Travis Scott, who said, Mike, why didn't your organization come back with another round of SECURE? And you know, you ought to look at this group called the Tax Foundation and get them to work with you to really analyze what's going on in Louisiana and how we compare to other states, because that's what they do as a nonprofit out of Washington, D.C. And I said, well, that's interesting you should say that, because we've been thinking the very same thing. And oh, by the way, last year at our Washington briefing, we had the president of the Tax Foundation address our group with this in mind. And so I brought Dr. Jim Richardson and my chairman at the time, Tom Clark, with Adams and Reese Law Firm. While we were in Washington, we met with the Tax Foundation, and we wanted to analyze whether they would help us in terms of what was required, and we engaged them. And from that, that's where the HCR 11 task force used as a fundamental principle, if you will, of what needed to be changed in our tax code to help with this fiscal reform activity.
You mentioned these CEOs. You mentioned in the first segment this concern around uncertainty. We've had 15 mid-year budget cuts in the last 9 years. We've got to raise revenue in many cases to offset that. The revenue increase is not always part of these organizations' budgets. You mentioned the Tax Foundation. You mentioned the House Concurrent Resolution 11 that was leading toward the task force. Explain to us where we are, Michael, and what those recommendations specifically were in the big picture.
In the big picture, we dealt with sales tax, property tax, corporate income tax, and personal income tax. And the issue is let's narrow and simplify the tax code. Let's get rid of the federal deductibility, because there's only 3 states that use the deductibility of your federal taxes from your state taxes, and not be tied to the federal government, because that does tie us to them. Eliminate that, and therefore we can reduce the personal income tax rate, we can reduce the corporate income tax rate, and then we can get down to a more, what would be, or should I say, less volatile circumstance in both those income taxes. We were not proponents of raising the sales tax to 5 cents. This 5 cents puts us way on top of everybody in the country. It is not a good thing. We need to get that back down to 4 cents. And so the whole thing was dealing with structuring the tax code where we got rid of this, what's called cliff that's coming by eliminating that
$1.3 billion fiscal cliff.
Exactly.
Right.
And also giving us some stability and certainty in terms of the tax code, so a business that is in the United States, in Louisiana, or a business outside of Louisiana, globally, considering Louisiana, can read our tax code and understand it and know that they're going to have taxes to pay this year and 5 years from now that's going to be basically the same.
Got about 30 seconds left, but the real idea here is to simplify.
Correct.
Make it much easier for businesses to comply with that tax code. Bring certainty for a long-term perspective to that tax code. And those are the things you're really working on. Now, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to get into that. I want to talk about the legislature and its response to a lot of these things. We are in the last week or so of the legislative session here as this show will air, and there hasn't been a lot done in terms of those recommendations that you guys think are so critical.
Yeah.
We're visiting with Michael Olivier. He is the president and CEO of the Committee of 100, and you're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
For over a quarter century, Kelly's has operated with honesty, integrity, and above all, safety. Kelly's features a fleet of quality equipment operated by dedicated, safety-minded employees skilled in land clearing, above-ground right-of-way maintenance, vegetation control, station yard and manned facility maintenance, above-ground pipeline support, and more. Kelly's Industrial Services, where pipeline right-of-way maintenance gets done right.
Passion, experience, safety. These are what set Arkell Constructors apart as a premier general contractor. At Arkell Constructors, our goal is to exceed our clients' expectations, whether it's commercial, industrial, or facility maintenance. We have the team and processes in place to provide a solution for you. To us, every project is a resume for our future. Arkell Constructors, the solution for your next building project.
Consumers and property owners with construction projects can have a successful result or regretful experiences that could have been avoided. Before any construction project, verify licensure of the contractor and check references. Scammers will claim to be insured or bonded, so always check first. Download our app, LA Contractor, from the Android or Apple Store. Visit our website, lacontractor.org, or contact the Louisiana State Licensing Board for Contractors. We're here to help before things go wrong. Hire a licensed contractor. It's the law.
What if I said that the American dream is alive and well, and that it exists for anyone willing to build it? That the power of a nation does not reside in its monuments, but in the hearts and minds of those who built them, and that the country's greatest heroes also wear hard hats. In today's America, it's not enough to dream about the future. You have to build it. Build your future at byf.org.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Michael Olivier, Committee of 100, is our guest. I had Governor Edwards, who you and I agree is an honorable man who wants to do the right thing. Don't agree with everything, but one of the things he has said over and over and over, Michael, is that businesses in Louisiana are not paying their fair share of taxes. What's your perspective? What's your organization's perspective on the governor and his thoughts that businesses aren't paying their fair share?
Our members feel like they pay their fair share on the state side and the local side. In fact, statistics show that in Louisiana, businesses pay 40% of the state taxes and 59% of the local taxes in Louisiana, as compared to the national statistics where on average businesses pay 40% of the state taxes and 55% of the local taxes. So in actuality,
we're a little higher.
We're a little higher on the local side, which means that our businesses pay more on the local side than the national average. And so we've got to, look, this is just not that cut and dry. Those 80%, the governor says 80% of the corporate filers didn't pay any taxes. Well, they pay taxes. They pay property taxes. They pay different sales taxes, things like that, employee taxes and all of those things. But what we got to measure is they did that based on the laws that we cobbled together.
Right.
We provided those exemptions and exclusions and waivers and incentives for them to do business in our state and stay in our state and be attracted to our state. So we shouldn't be looking to penalize them either. Again, this calls for the simplification of the tax code.
How do we get there? This legislature has pushed back on the governor. I agree with some of that, the fiscal conservative nature. We've cut budgets, but we've got real priorities out there that we are on the verge of starving to a degree. We have to invest more in our infrastructure in this state. Higher education, while it needs to constantly look for ways to streamline and be more efficient, has been defunded in this state at a faster level than any other state in the United States. There are things at the bottom end of our government that we ought to think about eliminating rather than just cutting. But what's the big picture from the Committee of 100's perspective, Michael, about how we get there in this tough political environment?
We know that this is not a one-year process. We know that it's on a continual basis, probably 3 to 5 years for fiscal reform. Now, I use the terms interchangeably: fiscal reform, tax reform, budget reform. All those are three different things, but they're interrelated. We're going after tax reform right now. Let's do that. We think that personal income tax, corporate income tax are the first two areas. We need to get rid of federal deductibility. We need to lower both those taxes, both individually and corporate. And then we go from there to the dedicated funds. There's those that are protected by Constitution, which our voters have approved, which if you changed it, would take their approval to take it off or change it. And then you have those that are approved by the legislature, called by statute, they are approved. We need to start there with those because they're easiest to get to. Now, our legislature is contemplating that. There are at least 4 bills right now going through the legislature that mandate a review of those dedicated funds that exist. We have some who have been around for so many years that they probably exceeded their term of usefulness. Well, the people who are collecting it don't think it's not useful because they're collecting it. But we need to say, where we put our monies best? And that's what we have to do in Louisiana. Look, healthcare costs are rising, and they're going to continue to rise. The more we offer more healthcare access to more people, we're going to have to find ways to fund it, particularly to meet the federal mandate, because those dollars in most cases are $2 to $1. If we don't spend $1, then we don't get $2 of the federal. So we're stuck there. We have to invest in higher education. We have the fund that is protected for K through 12, but what we don't have is a fund that's protected for higher education. And so we need to figure what is the best way that we can get the biggest, as they say, bang for our buck on the higher education side. The Louisiana Community and Technical System has done a wonderful job in terms of changing and providing a workforce product that is very useful to our business and industry. The Department of Economic Development has done a wonderful job with the Fast Start program. But that's just 2 parts of the equation. There's a lot more that has to be done. And so it's all about where do we get the best spend for that dollar, the tax dollar that's there, because we only have so much to go on. And we need to get rid of the volatility in our budget because of the price of oil. I mean, you can recall not too long ago the price of oil was over 100. Today it's around 50. That's a big difference for us because we live on an excise tax on that extraction of oil. And so we have a service economy in this state. We have to recognize that that's volatility in and of itself. So we've added to the volatility by the laws that we've cobbled together to get more business and industry and keep existing businesses here. But we need to streamline and simplify it.
30 seconds, crystal ball, what happens in this legislative session?
I don't know if anything is going to happen in this legislative session, save for a few measures that are still outstanding that may make a difference. I understand that there is a corporate tax measure that will deal with the exclusion of the federal deductibility. There may be added to the floor an amendment that will deal with the exclusion of federal deductibility from the personal income tax side. This gives us an opportunity to decrease both those taxes and become much more competitive.
Your message, Committee of 100's message, is simplify and streamline to bring certainty to this whole process.
Correct.
Michael, Olivier?
Thank you.
Hey, we'll be watching. I know you guys will be paying close attention to what goes on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
That's a wrap, guys. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week at this very same time for another edition of the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Hey guys, be sure to check out our new LBIS website, www.louisianabusinessandindustryshow.com.